Morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Capitalist Cast. Joining me today is Representative Jason Ortitay. Jason, can you explain a little bit about where your district is?
Sure. Thanks, Leo. I'm out here in the Southwest. I'm about 15 to 20 minutes south of the city of Pittsburgh. I actually have parts of Southern Allegheny and Northern Washington counties on the I-79 corridor, basically South Point and Cecil Township, all the way up to the Parkway, which will take you right into the city. So I'm kind of a little bit between the city, the airport, and the city of Washington itself. So we're suburban, rural kind of area.
A little bit of everything.
Oh, yeah.
So today I wanted to, I thank you very much for coming on today. I really wanted to talk about Governor Wolf has released a transportation funding scheme that awful doesn't quite do it justice about how bad it is. And I'd like to get into that. But before we jump into what the governor is proposing, maybe talk a little bit about how transportation projects and how things get funded now.
So there's a good mix of funding that goes into our transportation funding, highways, bridges, public transportation, those sorts of things. We do get a large portion of money from the federal government through their budget process. In our basic general fund budget, there's very limited money that goes to there's very limited money that goes from the general fund to PennDOT and transportation. The vast majority of the funding comes from the public transportation fund, the public trust fund. All those are where your gas tax goes, registration fees, fines and penalties from speeding tickets. The state police takes money out of there for their operation, which we're trying to whittle down. But the bulk of the transportation funding comes from fees and taxes, taxes that are outside of our normal budgeting process that are typically on cruise control. So
right.
The other large aspect of this is and this will be the last year that this happens, is about $450 million in a payment annually comes from the Turnpike to PennDOT. And as I said, that $450 million will go away next year, and the Turnpike will then start making $50 million a year payments. So that's where most of the money comes from for our transportation funding.
So we have the federal dollars coming in. We have the state, between gas taxes and all of the other kind of nickel and dime fees that we end up paying throughout the course of the year. As you mentioned, a chunk of that is actually going to the state police. If I'm not mistaken, is it around $600 million, something like that?
Yeah, it's in the ballpark, and we had put it in statute to reduce that, what they could take every year. So I think we're in year 2 of that right now, and trying to just find another way to fund our state police. And, I think every year that I've been here, we've been able to fund additional classes, cadet classes for our state police, because we've seen a lot of retirements over the last few years.
Right. So there's a lot of money going in. Do you remember offhand what the overall transportation budget is at this point on an annual basis?
It's around $8.5 to $8.8 billion a year.
So a pretty big chunk of money.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at our general fund and our budget, it's about $40 billion. And again, this is outside of that. And I know we usually talk about our shadow budget. We usually, as a state, spend upwards of $80 to $90 billion a year. So you're talking about 10% of the state's total spend for public transportation.
So we look at this, we have Pennsylvania, it's no secret. I think we either have the highest or the second highest gas tax on gasoline in the country. We have kind of this perpetual screaming from PennDOT, essentially, that they don't have enough money to work on the projects that need to be done. So Governor Wolf, after there was quite a bit of pushback about tolling bridges essentially all across the state, created this independent funding commission. Was the House and Senate, were they involved in this at all?
In the funding commission, I believe the House and Senate were invited to watch and be spectators, but everyone involved in the commission was selected by the governor himself or his staff. So there was no support or representation from the legislature at all for something that requires statutory approval for any of these proposals to go into effect. So, I mean, if the governor's intent was to create a partisan type approach to this, I mean, he succeeded very well. And then going back to what you mentioned about the tolling, that was completely ridiculous. So I want to give you a little bit of a backstory on how the tolling came to be, because there's a location in my district that's being proposed of one of the 9 bridges. Oh, and by the way, 8 of the 9 bridges are in Republican districts too. So, I mean, if that doesn't scream partisan hackery, I don't know what does. But about a half hour before the PennDOT secretary decides to go public with the bridges that they're looking to consider, I get a phone call, and she's updating me on what the plan is. And I can tell you that they really didn't know what they were doing when they launched all this stuff. And I said, listen, I'm willing to talk to you about funding for this particular bridge. It's about $150 million repair that needs to be done. It's right in the middle of my district. It's 90,000 cars a day. I said, let's have this conversation. And she's like, okay, I'm willing to have that conversation. And I can tell you to date, we've not had that conversation. I've not had the opportunity, or she has not afforded me the opportunity to speak with her. And they went public anyway with it. But even leading up to that, this whole process of funding these bridges, I don't even know how they picked them, because I heard rumblings that the bridge that was selected in my district was their 3rd choice in Allegheny County after talking to local county government officials. So if they did this little trade game behind the scenes, it is the least transparent process I've ever seen in my life. And it was definitely done for partisan reasons.
Yeah. And it's shocking that that this governor would do something on a partisan basis. I mean, that's just so outside of his character at this point. And that's sarcasm for anybody who didn't pick up on it.
Yeah. And Leo, you know, the worst part of this whole thing is the private public partnership board, the secretary chairs, they passed this generic resolution back in November after we had ended session. So we weren't even in session, that said that they were looking at doing tolling. And then in February, after, I guess, the legislative days, because there's a specific number of days the legislature has to disapprove of this, they waited coincidentally till after that, which none of us were really aware of, to announce which bridges they were going to consider, which to me is a definite violation of state law with the Triple P itself, because the law states that you have to have the financing company, the contractor, and the bridge that or the roads that you're going to do in the resolution before you vote on it. And they didn't do that. And I have written on this. I think I wrote a letter to the editor. I've written the secretary on this. They assured me that they have the statutory ability to do this, and I completely disagree. You know, I'm in the process here of organizing a lawsuit against PennDOT to stop this in its place, because it needs to be stopped. It is a terrible idea. They didn't do their due diligence ahead of time. They just shot from the hip and said, we're going to do this, and here we are. We're going to raise $150 million. And here's the best part. Leo, I don't know if you know this part. I just found this out a couple weeks ago myself. So there's a couple interesting parts of this whole tolling plan. One, the governor himself is the only one who can set the toll rate itself on these tolls, and they don't have to be uniform. So if he doesn't like you, he could say in your district it's $5 a car, and if he likes you in the other district, it could be 50 cents a car. And then on top of this, to backstop it, because I know people are thinking, well, I don't live near this. There's a couple reasons you should care. One is because just because it's my district today doesn't mean it won't be yours tomorrow. And two, if the finance company isn't made whole and there's not enough traffic to generate the financing company itself to pay for this, they take the money out of the motor vehicle fund anyway. So you're paying into that fund, and that money comes out anyway. So it becomes risk-free for these financing companies. And oh, by the way, I've heard that not a single American company has been interested in bidding on this. It's mostly European companies. And I'm not even sure that our contractors in the state are even interested in this project, because it's so toxic. So that PennDOT has taken a terrible plan and made it worse, if possible.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of making things worse, that's a great segue into the governor's transportation funding plan. So the governor wants to transition Pennsylvania away from a gasoline tax, which is, I mean, sounds wonderful when you just look at that part of it. But as always, the devil's in the details, and it's what they want to replace it with that is really just it's another great example of nickel and diming and picking winners and losers across industries. So would you talk a little bit about what the proposed funding mixture is?
So basically, I think they went around the country and cherry picked the worst possible ideas they could that other states have tried. Look, I get that they want to eliminate the gas tax, and with electric vehicles seem to be the wave of the future, and gas tax collections being down even through the pandemic here. A lot of people weren't traveling. It does need to be replaced, but how they do it is it's a terrible way in how they do it, because they don't phase it out until after 5 years of starting their current plan, which
Right.
adds a fee to delivery services like your Amazons, your FedEx, your UPSs, increase in basically jet fuel tax. They moved to an 8.1 cent per mile user fee, which makes no sense because not all cars are created equally. And then basically everyone in the rural districts are going to get pounded by this tax. I mean, I grew up basically in the middle of nowhere, and
Right.
it was 20 to 30 miles to civilization. I mean, it's nothing for my dad to drive 100 miles a day just to go back and forth to work. That proposal just doesn't make any sense. But the icing on the cake is that they believe that this proposal will raise $10 billion, which would take their current spending from $8.5 billion to almost $19 to $20 billion a year, which is
Right.
insane to think about. Like, I haven't seen this sort of tax increase since the governor's first budget, when he was trying to learn how to be an actual governor. I think his first tax increase was $15 to $20 billion, and he just kind of laughed at it and thought that it was reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have just to kind of run through this. I found a great kind of list of this, thanks to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette did a great summary. As you mentioned, it's 8.1 cents per mile, $1.11 fee added to rides. So if you take an Uber or a Lyft, you're going to pay $1.11 each direction, $1 fee on each package. Amazon, UPS for local grocery stores and also restaurants. So if you are someone who has your groceries delivered for whatever reason, you're going to be paying an extra $1 on it. Rental tax will go up. So if you're renting a car, it's going to get more expensive. They want to double vehicle registration fees. So if you are driving a car, you're going to go from $38 up to, let me do the math quick in my head, about $76 for your car per year. So this is the fee you are paying to drive the car that you already paid for. Establishing a fee for electric vehicles, which don't pay a gasoline tax. And then they will get rid of that fee once the miles driven fee is established. So it's a lot. And I mean, there are certainly things that make sense to look at, because if the idea is, you should pay for the services you use. The fact that electric vehicles currently aren't paying for any part of the transportation infrastructure is a problem. But when you start to look at, as you mentioned, who is going to really be bearing the brunt of this and who's going to be benefiting from it. I know for me, I live in a fairly rural area. If I want to go, the grocery store is only 2 minutes away, but if I want to do anything besides grocery shopping, I'm looking at a half hour drive really to get anywhere. So the money that folks who live in rural areas or more rural areas will be paying into the system will then actually be used to subsidize. It'll be used for roads and bridges, but it will also be used to subsidize public transportation, benefiting suburban districts, particularly in the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia area through SEPTA and through PAT. So the people who are using those public transit services will be benefiting from rural consumers' behavior, but the rural consumers won't necessarily have their roads fixed because that money is being diverted somewhere else.
Right. And, there's two things I want to mention. One, when you look at the actual report itself and it lists the members of this commission, it basically says that not every member of this supports every single proposal in this report, which is fine. But I was told from our staff who was at the meeting that they didn't even put this funding recommendation up to a vote for the commission to even approve. So that to me says that they were just looking to get something out there, that this was basically boilerplate, and they were just trying to put a bunch of ideas together that they already had in mind. But to not even put up a vote on a proposal is ridiculous.
And it sounds like if they're not putting this up for a vote, the whole board itself was really just kind of a veneer for, these are the things that we want, but we need to give it some level of legitimacy. So we're just going to waste a bunch of people's time to accomplish that.
Right. And the other point I want to make here is government, and particularly this administration, and granted, I've only been in office during this administration, we never look at how to save money, do things better, improve efficiencies. We could have had a commission, and I have a House resolution to do this, to study how other states and other countries run their transportation, their dollars, how they run their projects. You look at some of the Scandinavian countries, they can put together, a $5 million bridge over a weekend, and it takes us 6 months to a year to do it. And I get that we live in a unique climate where we have winters, we have 4 seasons, and that affects our roadways. But I mean, gosh, there's roads from the Roman Empire that are still in better shape than some of our roads here that were built thousands of years ago. I don't understand why our system can't be looked at and can't be reviewed, use the existing dollars that we have in place to prioritize and improve our processes. Because right now, PennDOT, before they do a single thing to our roads, it's like $1.3 to $1.4 billion just in staff. And I don't have an issue with them, with their staff. I have an issue with their management and their leadership, because they don't have any right now. And it starts at the top. To them, it's all about spending more and more money, and knowing that almost 20% of your entire budget is for staff instead of fixing the roads. It's hard for me to go up and want to vote for any more increases when you refuse to do anything better.
Yeah, and I think that's a great, we have a question. Somebody had mentioned, why do we have such, I'm going to say awful roads, because that's not the word that they used. But, we do. When you take a look at the condition of our roads versus the dollars spent, Pennsylvania has one of the higher dollars per mile cost in road repairs. There are, a variety of things that go into that, everything from at the state level, prevailing wage, to the federal level, doing Davis-Bacon kind of stuff that increase our labor costs, but doesn't necessarily increase the quality of the product that's being put in there. So what are, when you have, I had a chance, I read one of the interviews that you did, you mentioned a couple of things that are being done, kind of differently. What are some things that you've seen in kind of the research that you've done that might be ways to improve the system that we have and really use the dollars more effectively?
So part of what I've been looking to do is eliminate, there's 11 district offices, even though there's 12 district numbers throughout PennDOT. There is no reason why in today's world of technology that we need to have 11 physical district regional offices. That's millions of dollars being wasted. If we could consolidate down to 2, 3, or 4, that would save us millions of dollars right there. I think PennDOT needs to move in the direction of basically being a department and organization that hires companies to do everything for them. PennDOT struggles to find people to drive the plow trucks every winter. Why aren't we contracting that out? Because then we have other companies, the private sector, who can step up and do these things and probably do it better than what we do already. The other thing we need to look at is alternative type of materials for our roads and how we build our roads. Like just outside my housing plan out here, I live in a little townhouse in Cecil Township here. They just came through and tar and chipped the road. When you tell people in other states tar and chip, they have no idea what you're talking about. It really doesn't do anything. It's a Band-Aid that really, everything that they did will be washed away in a couple of weeks anyway. It's basically just, hey, look what we did to this road. It's a waste of money. The other problem that we never seem to address here is there are so many drainage issues on all of our roads across the entire state that when they come back through, and even when they do lay brand new asphalt on top of the road, they'll mill down like 2 inches and then put 4 inches on top of it. They never address the issues that caused the potholes to begin with, which is water flowing underneath the road. So until they can address these issues, we're going to keep wasting hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our road system instead of addressing the direct problem right off the bat. And that's why I wanted my own commission together to study these issues, to say, hey, it might cost a little bit more in the beginning, but it's going to save us billions of dollars down the road because we won't have to do these repairs every couple of years or every other year. So those are just a few ideas, but those are kinds of the things that I wanted to focus on that PennDOT just decided, and the Wolf administration decided it's just easier to ask everyone to pay more money.
Right. Well, yeah, because it's not necessarily them that's paying it. The interesting thing to kind of think about too, particularly is, when we're talking about some of the approaches that European countries have taken to their infrastructure, is, one of the things that I've always found interesting is they have in several countries, essentially when you are contracted to build a road, you are then responsible for its maintenance and upkeep for a period of 10 to 20 years, and they're bonded. They have to take out insurance policies and everything like that on it. So if, as happens on an all too regular basis, we have a bridge or a road that gets repaved, and then in 6 months or a year we're starting to see cracks and issues with the structure of it, it would then fall on the building company to actually come back and fix it, and they wouldn't be paid for doing it because they're being paid in the original contract to create a quality product. So I mean, it's just, there are things that we can be approaching very differently. And it's just not something that ever seems to be discussed.
No, because in Harrisburg, as you know, Leo, and I'm sure a lot of viewers out there, it's status quo. Change is so hard. Nobody wants to look at doing anything differently because, as you know, there's a million different lobbying groups on every side of the issue. And I'm convinced that a lot of times, if they can just keep the status quo, that they're happy. And that's the problem is that it's 2021. It's not 1950 anymore. Things need to be done differently, and our government just can't continue to spend. I mean, education is a prime example of this. I think since I've been in office, we've added $1.2 billion to education, and I think Pennsylvania is either the fourth or fifth highest funded public education system in the country. It's hard for me to keep voting for more of these dollars when I don't know that any substantial change is coming. And I've got bills to address that when we get back into the session here in the fall. But just adding more money doesn't solve a problem. It really doesn't, and it doesn't change the ability to educate our kids in a way that works today, that meets the needs of our state. Like, we have careers that are open in our state that we're not really catering our kids to or exposing them to, and that's a major problem when we continue to lose population, as evidenced by losing another congressional district. I mean, it's hard to believe that Pennsylvania had 36 congressmen at one point, and now we're at 18 and going to 17. Like, we spend all this money educating our kids, and then they leave and go somewhere else. So we're losing all of that because we're not being smart in how we educate our kids and how we do our career tracking in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I think that it's important for people to recognize there are states that do, whether we're talking about education or infrastructure, there are states that do it well, and then there's Pennsylvania. So I mean there's very little overlap in the doing things well and Pennsylvania Venn diagram. I guess, I mean, we're got about 7 minutes left. I want to change just a little bit because we do have, you had mentioned redistricting, which is going to be something that's going to be coming up. For you as a representative, when you take a look at, this is your first time in office, while a redistricting is happening, what does that look like from your perspective? What are some of the things that are happening on the back end that we don't see?
So that's actually very interesting, and it is my first time going through it. And what I thought it was and what it actually is are two completely different things. So there's a map room up on I think it's either the fourth or fifth floor of the Capitol building. And, my thought was you walk in and it's like a big giant risk board with the state of Pennsylvania and all the districts. And it really isn't. It's basically just a laptop with a screen,
right,
with a projector. So you walk in, and I had asked to go up there because I had never been up there in the 7 years I've been here. And I kind of wanted to see what the process was like. And I won't go into too many of the details, but they show you your district. And what I've been looking at are the preliminary numbers from the census data. And every single municipality in my district has grown substantially. As a matter of fact, I think I have two of the fastest growing municipalities in the entire western part of the state, which projects my district as it stands right now to be around 75,000 people. And I think we need to be between 60 and 65,000. So when you
Right.
look at this, you're like, all right, well, my district obviously has to get smaller population wise. So how does that process work? And I always wonder this too. So I know that we have the commission because you have your Senate majority and minority leaders, same with the House, and then you have the fifth who's supposed to be
Right.
independent, uh, and that person was appointed by the PA Supreme Court, which was former Chancellor Nordenberg, who I've met many times. I think he's a pretty good impartial pick. I know he's got some political leanings, but the way that he's approached this seems to be very fair. But my number one question was, well, how do you know where to even start drawing? Like, do you just start in the middle of the state and just start drawing numbers and
Yeah.
districts? And I was actually told that they kind of look at who's retiring and maybe who's not coming back first,
Right.
and then maybe start splitting up their districts. Or sometimes they'll start looking at the urban areas because there's laws regarding, I think, minority and majority districts.
Yeah.
Um, so they'll start drawing those and then they'll start working their way out. But they basically alluded to the fact that don't expect too many changes. Like typically districts don't change any more than 15 to 20%. And then they have, it was funny on the map, they have where the current sitting state rep actually lives, and there's a pin. Um,
Right.
I guess they do their best to make sure nobody gets drawn out of their district if they're running for reelection. It's look, with all that said, it's a very strange process to me. At the end of the day, I will take whatever district I get. I'm not angling to get a certain township or borough, and I'm not angling to get rid of anybody. I like my district the way that it is. I've had it since its inception in 14 when I came in 15. But yeah, it's a weird process that has only gotten weirder because the census data has been delayed, which is going to cause further issues because we're not going to get that till the end of September. We won't have it in any kind of workable format until mid-October. And as you know, there's statutory dates here. They have 90 days to draw the maps, and then there's two 30-day statutory periods to be challenged in court, which, let's face it, we all know they're going to be challenged.
Yeah.
They almost always are. So we're already looking at best case scenario, February. And that's typically when we start the petition period. So I don't know where we're going there. It depends how fast they can draw these maps. Typically, I think the average is right around 65 to 70 days. But with technology, who knows these days? They might be able to do it a lot faster.
Yeah, yeah, and that's an interesting point because for anybody who's not aware of the process, in order to run for pretty much any seat in Pennsylvania, whether we're talking local municipalities all the way up to congressional, you have a certain period of time. It usually is right around Valentine's Day that it starts to gather signatures on your petitions, your nominating petitions, in order to appear on the primary ballot as a member of the Republican or Democratic Party. That process in presidential years gets slid down just because of when the presidential primary falls in Pennsylvania versus our non-presidential years. So it should be, as you mentioned, it should be interesting to see what happens, just because is there going to be enough time to get these districts drawn, go through the court proceedings, and then get the paperwork, essentially, the bureaucratic part of it taken care of before any of these other statutory deadlines happen. And I think that's actually, for anybody who wants to know the answers to those questions, next week I'm actually going to have Representative Seth Grove, who is the chairman of the State Government Committee, on. And his committee is the one responsible for both congressional and state redistricting. And we're going to get into this issue a lot more with Representative Grove and how he's approaching the process differently than what's been done in the past. And on that note, Representative, I appreciate your time this morning. There's a lot happening as it relates to transportation. There's a lot happening just kind of as it relates to Pennsylvania in general. We live in interesting times. So I appreciate you taking a half hour out of your morning to come on and talk with us, and for everybody who tuned in today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Leo, and thank you for everyone for watching.
Again, next week, everybody, we are going to have Representative Seth Grove on. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day for watching this live. And if you have watched this on YouTube, thanks for sticking around for the whole show.